So we put together a presentation for this meeting, mostly to run through all the ZIPs that we're proposing get included in version 3. So before we start, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to stop me and just ask questions. Or you're more than welcome to type the questions in the chat, which we'll be monitoring as well. So, if we pass over something and you think of a question about something that we covered earlier in the presentation, please feel free to shout that out in the chat as well. So the agenda for this meeting is to give a bit of background on ZRX 2.0 and 3.0, talk about the actual upgrade process, and then to cover the individual ZIPs that we are proposing for version 3 at a high level, and to get feedback on those as well. So quick timeline. So we actually released the coordinator spec last month in April, and also deployed the contracts to mainnet. I believe it's in the hands of a couple different relayers experimenting with it right now. The ERC 1155 asset proxy was also completed a while ago, and an audit for that will be starting, I believe, roughly a week from today, next Monday. So that's been delayed a little bit just because the actual EIP has not been finalized yet. So that's kind of blocking the vote for adding this to the protocol. And then we also ideally will be finalizing the 3.0 feature set this month. In June, assuming all goes well with the 1155 standard, there will be a vote for adding 1155 support to ZRX protocol. And ZRX Mesh, or the MVP of ZRX Mesh, is planned for release in June as well. And then finally, in early Q3, 3.0 should be entirely finalized and completed, and will probably be audited in the first month or so of Q3 as well. And then a vote for 3.0 will go on as well. So we're wondering if it would make sense to vote on individual ZIPs for version 3.0, or to have a single vote for the entire 3.0. Just from a practical standpoint, I think it makes sense to vote on the entire 3.0 at once after getting community consensus for all of the features that will be included. Each individual feature requires quite a bit of technical expertise to understand and to vote on. It's also just harder to remove features once implemented if like an individual feature were to not pass. So it is important that we have community consensus over all the features that will be included before actually writing most of the code. So quick high-level overview of what happened in the V2 upgrade. So it was a pretty big shift in the architecture of our smart contracts, and the main purpose was to allow trading of arbitrary token standards outside of just ERC20. But in addition to that, the contracts became much more flexible. It became possible to implement custom filter contracts, custom signature validator smart contracts for trading from a wallet, things like this. Basically, the protocol became much more flexible and extensible in version 2. And when the version 2 upgrade happened, users had to reapprove their allowances to the new set of proxies. So it was a pretty hard and manual upgrade. We've received a good amount of feedback on some of the features in version 2. So the first piece of feedback that we've constantly been hearing since version 1 actually is the added friction from mandating that fees are denominated in ZRX. So, well, we'll get into the actual ZIP a little bit later. There also just has been a general lack of liquidity, and it's been hard for relayers to monetize because of this. There has been quite a bit of demand for interacting with the smart contracts in different programming languages. So, for example, relayers tend to use more JavaScript or TypeScript, whereas traders and market makers tend to use more like Python and Java. There's also been some demand for just increased flexibility, especially for matching relayers who want to use match orders without requiring any upfront capital. So the high-level goals of 3.0 are to implement new token economics that will help to incentivize liquidity. I would say this is roughly 70 to 80% of the work involved in the proposed feature set. It's one of the other main goals is to really improve the developer experience for interacting with the smart contracts. There will be improvements that will make it easier to write the off-chain tools for interacting with the contracts, as well as developer experience improvements for people who want to build custom smart contracts that would utilize the ZRX contracts. We also want to generally improve order matching and allow the match orders function to work with the existing matching relayers fee models. So I already covered a lot of what the upgrade process will look like. But yeah, I can't say this enough. Community consensus is extremely important before moving forward with implementing a lot of these ZIPs. Once we do have rough community consensus, we'll create a top-level ZIP that will aggregate all of the lower ZIPs, and then there will be a vote on just that top-level ZIP. Then the 3.0 exchange contract will be deployed. Assuming that the vote passes, the exchange contract will be authorized to utilize the asset proxies, and then new orders can be created for the 3.0 exchange contract. V2 orders will continue to be interoperable with the V2 exchange contract, and I think those two contracts will coexist for at least a few months. Version 1 was never officially shut off. In the case of version 2, I think it's likely there might be a vote to shut it off at some point after most of the relayers have migrated over. So this will be a smoother upgrade process. The API for the exchange contract will be very similar to how it looked previously. The order schema might change a little bit, but other parameters will more or less be the same. There will be additional functions, so that's one change, but also mostly backwards compatible. And then, of course, users will not need to reapprove any proxies. So we've already talked about ZIP 28 a good amount, but I just want to recap a little bit. So ZIP 28 proposes allowing any arbitrary, or allowing fees to be charged in any arbitrary asset. So what this would do is add maker fee asset data and taker fee asset data fields to an order, and that would allow fees to be denominated in literally any asset that's supported by the protocol. So this could even be something as flexible as like multiple assets using the multi-asset proxy. It's also pretty low cost implementation-wise, and it should not add very much gas overhead at all. I'm guessing that for the most part, fees will be denominated in one or both of the assets that are already involved in a trade. So this just ends up looking like percentage-based fees. And when you do that, when you actually encode the orders, it's able to dedupe the redundant data and actually doesn't add very much gas overhead at all. Oh yeah, and for each of the ZIPs, actually, I'll give a quick status update. So number 28 is in the process of being implemented right now. ZIP 32 proposes adding rich revert reasons into the exchange contract. So this is one of those developer experience improvements, and there actually was a proposal to do something similar to this in version 2, but it ended up not being adopted because it was a bit too complicated at the time. But essentially, currently when a transaction reverts, you will see an error message that is somewhat helpful, but doesn't really include all of the information that you would need to debug that transaction. So yeah, an example, you might just see transfer failed, and you would have no idea why. You wouldn't know which transfer within the order actually failed, things like this. So with rich revert reasons, we're able to actually pass in parameters into the revert reasons. So you'll be able to see the hash of the order where the transfer failed. You'll be able to see the actual asset data that caused the transfer to fail, stuff like that. This has actually already been implemented in the experimental V3 branch. So if anyone's interested, check that out. And yeah, the ZIP is also pretty descriptive if anyone wants to look more into what the scheme for this actually looks like. So version 2 added support for trading from a smart contract wallet. But there have been complaints that it's not quite flexible enough. So if you're trading from a smart contract, that smart contract has to implement this isValid signature function, and that signature function just takes the hash and the signature as inputs. So it's not actually able to decipher any of the properties of this order. It only sees the hash. So it's not quite flexible enough for a lot of people's needs. So ZIP 33 proposes adding signature types where the entire order would actually be passed in. And this would allow people to create orders that are valid only based on some other off-chain state. So an example of something you could do with this is you could create an order that's valid only if it's within some percentage of some on-chain price feed, for example. So that would just automatically cancel your order if the price on this price feed moved too far away from the order's price. So this has also been implemented in the 3.0 branch. I think there are a few edge cases that still potentially need to be handled here. So currently in 2.0, the exchange smart contract only validates signatures the very first time an order is filled. This is just a gas optimization. So if an order has already been partially filled and you attempt to fill it again, it just won't check the signature at all. So this makes this particular use case a little bit less flexible. So it's possible that we would just have to special case these signature types and actually check the signatures multiple times, even for partial fills.
That does not get rid of the old signature types. So there'd still be the ones that just take the hash, but then there's a new signature type that also gets the method? Or the
Yeah, so that's our current thinking, is to keep all of the old signature types in there. I would be open to potentially deprecating some of those signature types. It's not clear to me that anyone's actually using them, but that's an open question. You know, if anyone is really pushing for either way, we would definitely take that into consideration. But yeah, right now it's totally backwards compatible.
the nice thing, in my opinion, about the old format is that those signatures can also be used for other purposes.
Yeah.
That I don't have anything at Open Relay that actively uses those signature types, you know, for orders, but I have followed that same format in some other contracts that I'm working on, you know, where we're validating this, so that if there's a wallet signature, for example, that it could be that same is valid signature function could validate other things.
Yeah. So actually, that brings up another thing I forgot to cover. So there's an EIP to kind of standardize what signature verification would look like for smart contracts. I want to say it's EIP 1271. I think I added a comment on ZIP 33 pointing to this. But it probably makes sense that we add a signature type for EIP 1271 as well. So that's closer to the old signature type we had, but instead of taking in a hash in a signature, it takes in a data byte array in a signature. So what we could do there is just like ABI encode the order and then pass it into that data field. And that would be a nice way to standardize things. So this is one of the pretty highly demanded features that we've been getting asked about. How can we integrate liquidity from other on-chain sources, such as Kyber, Uniswap, Oasis DEX? And how could we do that while preserving the existing UX of filling a 0x order? So this ZIP proposes adding an asset proxy that would hook into the Kyber smart contracts. We think this is the best first step for doing this because Kyber actually already integrates the liquidity from like Uniswap and Oasis DEX, and I believe Dutch X as well. So by adding support for Kyber, we would essentially be adding support for all those other on-chain liquidity sources as well. So this particular ZIP would actually be voted on separately from the rest of 3.0 because it is a bit independent. So it does require that 3.0 be implemented as a prerequisite. Unfortunately, it will not work with the 2.0 contracts for like a very edge case reason. Essentially, in the 2.0 contracts, the order of the transfers within the fill function goes from maker to taker, then taker to maker. And in order for this particular ZIP to work, we need to flip the order in which the transfers happen. So take a look. I think it's pretty interesting. So just to give a quick high-level overview of what this thing actually looks like, it is an asset proxy that is also a maker, and this asset proxy would have an is valid order or is valid signature function, and anyone can create orders on behalf of this proxy and then fill those orders just as they would a normal 0x order. When they go to actually fill an order, this proxy will be transferred the tokens from the taker first, then it will use those tokens to purchase the maker token on Kyber, and then it will transfer those back to the taker.
So from the core contract perspective, the key thing that happens here is switching the maker and taker contracts, and then the asset proxy takes care of getting other liquidity sources, getting liquidity from other sources. And yes. I would assume that you could also apply this to other liquidity sources other than Kyber.
Yes. So I think Kyber is the best starting point just because it does integrate all those other sources. But yeah, you could theoretically do this for any other on-chain liquidity source.
And that wouldn't necessarily even take another contract upgrade. It would just take a new asset proxy.
Yes, exactly. Cool. We were originally thinking of a way to do this with just a single asset proxy that would like kind of integrate all the other liquidity sources in a generic way. But I think it's just too difficult to make it generic. I think these proxies will need to special case those other protocols. But yeah, one of the nice things is like this, it doesn't require any extra allowances or anything like that. It's like relatively safe to add into the ZRX pipeline of contracts. The only thing that would need to be done is registering this as an asset proxy within the exchange contract. Sorry, I think I just saw a comment pop up. Was there another question?
The question was, is there any workaround for V2? I guess the only workaround that's currently possible is to completely pre-fund an asset proxy, just because that reversal of maker to taker, taker to maker isn't happening yet. So the V2 version would need to be funded basically with some source of funds for every single token out there. So we kind of believe it's not as practical to do that.
Yeah. There are certainly ways to do this in V2, but it would probably change the UX a good amount or be much more costly to do. So ZIP 39, again, would be voted on separately. And this actually could be implemented as part of V2. So there is currently this issue with stateful assets such as non-fungible tokens or maker CDPs, where if someone wants to purchase these assets, it's possible to front run that purchase and change the state of the asset before someone actually completes the purchase. So the example I always give is with a CryptoKitty. So I go to buy a CryptoKitty and someone front runs that and breeds that CryptoKitty with something else. So now this CryptoKitty that I purchased is actually less valuable because it's already been bred. So this static call asset proxy would essentially just make a static call to some arbitrary contract that would verify some on-chain state before completing that purchase. And this would completely solve that front-running problem. So there are a few implementation details that need to be figured out, but the ZIP gets into it in a lot of detail. So please check that out. Would love feedback. I guess another use case I would love to be able to support with this would be like just KYC or whitelisting traders. So we did create an extension contract for this a while ago, but it hasn't really been adopted. And I think a big part of that was because it changes the UX of filling orders. So with a static call asset proxy, the UX would be exactly the same. It would still just need a single signature, but ideally it would also be able to support this whitelisting use case. So I mentioned that in version 2, the order matching function that was added is not flexible for everyone's needs. It really targets the arbitrage use case specifically, and it results with the caller getting the absolute maximum amount of spread from matching two orders. The problem is that this doesn't address the matching relayer use case as well. A lot of matchers like to take fees in terms of both of the tokens involved in a trade rather than just a single token. But by doing that, you are actually filling both orders more than necessary and actually potentially giving up a small amount of the spread that you would otherwise keep. So ZIP 40 gets into this in quite a bit of detail and kind of shows some graphs of what kind of, or what the profit curve would look like under different circumstances. But I do think it's really important that we support this use case for matchers. Otherwise, it just requires them to either have upfront capital for matching orders, or it requires them to write their own extension contracts to do this for them. And it seems like generally people are not too keen on writing their own smart contracts because they will probably need to get them audited and things like that. So this would be a separate function from the existing match orders, and it would just add this functionality in. So we dug into ZIP 31 a good amount in last month's meeting. This is the ZIP that covers most of the updated network economics. Now that people have had around a month to digest this information, we would be happy to take more questions about it. If there are no questions, we would love for people to join in on the discussion on our forum or on the ZIP itself. So there are also going to be a handful of developer experience updates that I mentioned earlier. So we don't need to get into all these ZIPs in a lot of detail. They're pretty small. So ZIP 34 would add a mechanism for canceling ZRX meta transactions. My personal favorite approach is to add an expiration time to them, and that ZIP outlines why I would favor that approach. There is another ZIP for adding no-throw versions of all the cancel functions. So there's currently a batch cancel orders function, but it's a bit annoying to use because if a single cancel fails, then the whole transaction will fail. And a cancel could fail for something as small as an order being expired. So this would make it easier to cancel batches of orders at once. Before we get into this one, I think there was another question in the chat.
Yeah, is there any... Sorry, go ahead.
Brendan Curtis was asking if we had any feedback from market makers on ZIP 31 incentives.
Yeah, so the feedback has been pretty positive overall. I think most people aren't expecting this to fully solve the liquidity problem, but they do see it as a significant benefit once sufficient liquidity has already been established and there is actually trading volume going through the protocol. But yeah, generally pretty positive.
Another question is, has there been any more research done on choosing this specific fee percentage per transaction?
That is, I think we're still just targeting roughly the gas cost of filling a single ERC20 order. But definitely open to feedback on that as well.
There is a ZIP number 42 as well that kind of outlines the numbers right now. So if you do have any thoughts or comments on that, then that's a great place. But also just generally the forum is where the discussion is ongoing.
Yeah, there are a few edge cases that we need to think of. for actually, charging fees on a per order basis. Obviously, different asset types will cost slightly different amounts of gas, and it might make sense to have lower amounts of gas for different assets, although I think that could lead to some exploits. There was another question outlined in ZIP 42 around how match orders would be handled. Does that count as filling a single order or filling 2 orders, things like that? So yeah, really interested in any feedback. Yeah, please post your comments on ZIP 42 or the forum. Or if there are specific questions right now, happy to answer them the best I can. Jacob, do you actually want to cover this ZIP?
So we are gathering community consensus on introducing what we kind of call a property-based order. So this allows orders to specify the assets that they want based on the properties, not necessarily the specific IDs. The actual asset ID is supplied later on by the taker of the order. So the maker of the order must specify some sort of on-chain predicate, which we can call with that supplied data to make sure everything is all good there. And it opens up some interesting use cases, like being able to buy an NFT just based on its properties. So you can specify something that looks at an ID less than 1,000, or you can set a open standing order for any axie, for example. And this really helps build the liquidity for NFTs. So this is currently in a bit of a discussion setting right now before we think about making it into V3. So if this is a feature that you would like or have some thoughts on how this could be used in other ways, then feel free to give us a comment on the ZIP as well. And it seems like in chat we have some people that are expressing interest already.
Yeah, I think we're all definitely fans of the outcome of this ZIP. The one thing I will say is that this is a pretty large deviation from the existing ZRX architecture because there's currently not a good way for a taker to kind of pass in extra data. So with property-based orders, the taker would need to pass in the specific ID for the token they're purchasing. So I think that's why this is a bit of a controversial ZIP, but ideally it would be added. There just needs to be a clean way to do it. So these are more developer experience improvements. So many more of the functions in the exchange contract will be made public. There will be additional functions for encoding and decoding asset data, like querying balances of tokens and stuff like that. There will be better return values for a handful of functions. Basically, we want to get to the point where any language that supports like automatically generated contract wrappers would be able to just like get a lot of the developer tools for free with just those contract wrappers. So a lot of the existing TypeScript tooling is around like hashing orders or encoding asset data, things like that. So yeah, ideally those things would all just be automatically implemented in most languages. And down the line, we're exploring implementing wrappers in any language that could compile the WASM. It seems like something that could be done. I think the WASM community is like really growing a lot recently. A lot of progress is being made. These are a couple stretch features that we're trying to gauge the demand on. So post-dated order would be like an order that cannot be filled unless it's past a certain time. This is something that could potentially be implemented with the static call asset proxy as well. And then generalized callbacks would allow you to call arbitrary functions on arbitrary smart contracts as part of a fill. There's a lot of complexity around this. It's not clear like at what point during the fill this callback should be called. But by having something like this, you could potentially more easily integrate other on-chain liquidity sources, for example. And yeah, I think that covers most of the ZIPs. There might be a few outstanding that kind of just get into some of these issues more specifically. But yeah, we would really love everyone's feedback. So it sounds like people would like a better breakdown of the things included in ZIP 31. And yeah, we definitely have gotten that feedback. I think everything we've released is extremely dense, and it's hard to really parse out the information that's relevant to you. So one thing we want to do is just create a high-level doc that would explain how this affects different user types, basically. So if you're an open order book relayer, or if you're a matching relayer, or you're a market maker, or you're an NFT marketplace, and kind of break down the different aspects of ZIP 31 that can affect those things. There's another question: what parts of ZRX v3 will be on layer 2? Not sure what you mean by that. The core protocol is pretty much entirely layer 1, or I guess you could potentially consider the off-chain messages somewhat of a layer 2 solution. We are also working on a much more scalable decentralized exchange using zero-knowledge proofs in the background. I think that's a ways out, although there will be a proof of concept being released within the next few weeks. It's pretty much done right now, just being tested. But the proof of concept will just be running on the Robson testnet, and it'll be mirroring trades from Binance and actually settling them on the testnet using zero-knowledge proofs. But I think it'll be a while before this is actually ready for production. And it is a pretty significantly different architecture than the core smart contracts are right now. And I think it would probably take even longer for us to implement things like these new network economics within a zero-knowledge proof. There's a question about ZIP 43. I'm a little unsure how this would work in practice. Would I pass in a function to the ZRX contract and require the return value of that to meet some value? For example, if I only wanted a CryptoKitty that was ready to breed, would I include the isReadyToBreed function call in the order and require the result to be true, or would it not be that flexible? Yes, that's essentially what it would be. So there would probably be a specific asset proxy that is able to process this data. And it would just be like an arbitrary function call. And then you would specify the hash of the return data that you expect. And then it would look at the return data, make sure that the hashes match, and then perform the rest of the transfer or not. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Will, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, as the presentation, it's really important for us to get some sense of community consensus on these features. And we're not necessarily looking for everyone to say, I am in favor of this feature and explicitly want it to be implemented. But what we mean by community consensus is that no one should be saying this is this feature is going to, destroy my use case, or this feature is completely unacceptable to us. So we're more looking for like an absence of what is the term? Instead of looking for everyone to formally approve every feature, we're looking for an absence of, I guess you could say, like contentiousness. And so in order to kind of figure out where we're at in terms of community consensus, it's really hard to get a signal on it. And doing something like a vote just doesn't really make sense for a community where there's like 25 people on this call. So I don't know, just even commenting on, this ZIP that will be proposing, the set of features that go into V3, even just kind of just saying like we have no issues with the proposed set of features, even that would go a long way towards allowing us to feel comfortable putting in a ton of engineering resources to write the Solidity smart contracts that will have these V3 features, and then B, spending a lot of time and money on getting the set of smart contracts audited. So just any sort of brief, basically thumbs up or approval on GitHub would go a long way towards making us feel comfortable moving forward. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks Amir for managing the call, and thanks everyone on the call for calling in. And we will do another one in 4 weeks from now, I think.
Yep.
Cool. Looking forward to seeing everyone, or some of you in New York next week. Have a good rest of the week.